Hi, my name is Lauren. Welcome to the Lowellian. With me today, I have the Register of Deeds, Richard Howe. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
Can you explain to us what the Register of Deeds does?
Sure. It's an elected office, and I oversee all of the land records for the city of Lowell and the 9 towns around here. And those are Billerica, Carlisle, Chelmsford, Drake, Dunstable, Lowell, Tewksbury, Tingsboro, Westford, and Wilmington. And I've held the office for 30 years. I've had a lot of practice reciting those 10 towns.
That was impressive, yeah.
Very quickly. And it's a 6-year term, and it's on the ballot this year, but I'm not running for re-election. I'm retiring after 30 years, and so there'll be a new Register of Deeds. And that person is named Karen Casella. And even though the election hasn't been held yet, I can say she'll be elected because she's the nominee of the Democratic Party. She beat 2 other candidates in the state primary in this past September, but there are no other candidates on the ballot. So there's no Republican nominee and there's no unenrolled candidate. So she is unopposed. So as long as she gets 1 vote, she'll be the next Register of Deeds.
Nice. Okay, so we have something we know for the election.
Yes. But that actually is almost more common than not on this year's ballot, that at least several of the positions are unopposed.
How did you decide to become the Register of Deeds?
I'm a lawyer, and I was doing mostly court-appointed criminal defense, and the truth is too many of my clients are going to jail, which I say it's serious because it was back in an era of that was the start of the mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses. And so a lot of people who were just basically addicts who needed treatment were going to jail for 5 years, so they could rob a grocery store and get less time than selling a bag of heroin. Yeah. And so one day after a trial, I remember walking back to my office saying, I have to do something different. And I saw that day's Lowell Sun, and it said Register of Deeds to retire. And I thought, oh, I ought to look into that. And I did. And I ran. And in the Democratic primary, there were 9 of us, 9 candidates. And out of 25,000 votes, I won by 8.
What? Really?
And then we had recounts, and the margin of victory went up. And then I was elected in November, and I've been elected ever since, every 6 years.
Oh my God, that's such a good voting story.
Yeah, no, it's important because, you know, every vote counts, and you don't realize it until it's too late to do anything about it. So that's why it's a good habit to vote whenever you can.
Awesome. Now that you have familiarized us with the Registry of Deeds, can you go through some of the other state offices that may be on the ballot?
Sure. Well, we have a big election coming up, and almost everybody in the country knows that it's the presidential election, and we get to vote. We don't actually vote for president. We vote for the electors who are going to vote for the presidential candidates. And I would have thought it was Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. But when you get your ballot, there's 6 candidates on it for different parties, like the Green Party, the Rainbow Party. And so you're sort of like struck by, like, who are all these people?
Yeah.
But the 2 main ones are there. So besides president, there's the United States Senator, which is Elizabeth Warren. She was elected in 2012. She was reelected in 2018 because it's a 6-year term, and so she's running again this time. She is opposed by a guy named John Deaton, who is a Republican nominee. Then next down on the ballot, it's representative in Congress, which is our member of Congress, who is Laurie Trahan, and she is running unopposed this year.
Oh, wow.
So that's another drama-free election night. Then you have state senator in Lowell and some of the surrounding towns. That's the incumbent is Edward Kennedy. He's a Democrat. and he's running for re-election. And then there's a Republican challenging him. Her name is Carla Miller. So that will be one of these election night outcomes. And then we have state representative. And Lowell has 3 different representatives because of the size of the community. The incumbent, well, there'll be a new one because there's a young man named Tara Hong who defeated the incumbent Ratty Mom in the Democratic primary for one of the districts. And so Tara Hong is running. There is an unenrolled candidate named David Willett on the ballot, but he's not been running a very vigorous campaign, so I'm pretty sure Tara Hong will win. And then we have Rodney Elliott, who represents the district that's north of the Merrimack River. It includes part of Chelmsford. He's running unopposed, so he'll definitely run. And then what I find very interesting is the incumbent candidate for downtown Lowell and the Belvedere neighborhood. Her name is Vanna Howard. And she has an opponent, and the opponent is a member of the Pirate Party, which you heard me right. There's a
pirate party? I didn't realize.
I don't know that much about it, and I didn't even know there was somebody running against her, but there is.
Wow.
And so he might be the first pirate candidate to appear on a ballot in Lowell. So those are the offices that most people know about. But besides those, there's what is commonly called down ballot offices, which means they're down the ballot. And one of them is Governor's Council. And Governor's Council is a throwback to the earliest days of English settlement in Massachusetts, where you had a governor who was appointed by the English king, but then the king also appointed councilors who had a lot of authority, and they gave councilor advice to the governor. We had a revolution, right? 1775, 1780 something. There's the Massachusetts Constitution, and they retained the office of governor and governor's council. Over the years, governor's council has lost a lot of the power it once had. So right now, its primary function is to ratify judicial appointments that the governor makes. It also ratifies criminal pardons. So if the governor thinks somebody who's been convicted and incarcerated is deserving of some kind of leniency and issues a pardon, the governor's council has to vote in favor of it for it to take effect. And so there are 9 governor's councilors. And so they represent huge districts because if you think about it, there's 9 members of Congress. And so there's the same number. And their districts don't overlap entirely. It's like a Venn diagram, 2 circles of about the same size. And the governor's councilors run every 2 years. And there's a great story from Lowell's history about governor's council and the importance of voting. And there was a person on the Lowell City Council named Robert Kennedy who ran, I think it was in 1986 or 88. He ran for governor's council against the opponent whose name was Herbert Connolly, and he'd been there forever. And it was a very close outcome, and it went all the way to the state Supreme Judicial Court, and they found that Kennedy won by 1 vote.
Oh my God.
And the story I've always heard, and I'm not quite sure if it's true, that neither Connolly nor his wife voted.
Really?
They were too busy running around giving signs to people to hold for them at the polls that they never made it back to their own polling place to vote. And so if that's true, that was the difference between winning and losing the election. So that's
insane.
That's my prime example of why every single vote
matters.
It doesn't matter every time, but it has the potential to matter every time. And you don't want to be the one who, a person you'd like to have win loses by one vote and you didn't bother showing up, right?
Yeah.
So besides governor's council, you have registered deeds, the office I hold. Then you have clerk of courts. That's another throwback to colonial days. Although it's an important office, it's the person that oversees the Superior Court in Middlesex County. The incumbent's name is Michael Sullivan. He's been there since 2006, I think, and he's running unopposed. So those are the positions that are on the ballot this year.
Can I ask, what does the Superior Court do exactly?
Sure. In Massachusetts, there's different courts, and each has a different function. Juvenile court, juveniles, right? Housing court, evictions, housing. District court is like the entry level for a civil case, meaning, you know, somebody gets in an accident and it's caused by somebody else and you sue them for damages. But more common, it's that's where criminal cases begin. So like if you were arrested for operating under the influence, that would stay in the district court. If you get arrested for robbery, that might start in the district court, but it gets bumped up to Superior Court. So it's a Superior Court handles much more important cases in terms of the potential punishment for crime or the money that's at stake if it's a claim for damages, something like that. Then there's a bunch of other courts. But for some reason, the Superior Court is the one that has an elected clerk.
That's interesting.
It is. It's one of those, you know, there's a saying in the law that reading a page of history is worth reading a book of logic, because sometimes the reason for stuff happening doesn't make any sense unless you understand the history of it.
Yeah.
That's why I keep saying it goes back to colonial. Now, there's a couple other offices like that that are not on the ballot this year. One that's perhaps best known is district attorney. That's the person who's in charge, who represents us, the people, in prosecuting crimes. And the district attorney is Marion Ryan. That's a 4-year term, and so she'll be up for re-election 2 years from now in 2026. Another one is the sheriff. Now, we've all heard of the sheriff, right?
Yeah.
But there's still an office of sheriff in Massachusetts, and that's based on county. Each county has a sheriff, and that's an elected official. But their job is to oversee the county jail and the county house of correction. Now, the difference between those, and in Middlesex County, they're in the same place, but the difference is the jail is the place where people who are awaiting trial are held. So if you're arrested for murder, it's a serious crime. And so it's likely the judge is not going to release you on bail. The judge is going to say you're held in custody until the trial because there's too much of a risk of you running away. But you haven't been convicted of anything. So you're not guilty. You're not a criminal. And so you go to the jail. The House of Correction is more like a prison, but it's a prison for like lower level sentences. Like the maximum you can go to the House of Correction is for 2 years. So like the drunk driving case, if it's your third offense and you get convicted, I forget what the mandatory sentence is. It might be a year in jail. So you would do that at the House of Correction. If you get arrested for armed robbery and you're sentenced to 10 years, you would go to state prison, not to the House of Correction. So the sheriff oversees the jail and the House of Correction.
Wow.
And then the final one is the Register of Probate, which is kind of the companion to the Register of Deeds. So the Register of Deeds has all the land records. The Register of Probate has all what's called probate records. Now, that's kind of wide-ranging. when somebody dies owning property, the law of probate determines who gets it. So like if you leave a will, your survivors file the will at the registry of probate, and a judge looks it over and it's allowed, and then the property can be distributed in accordance with the will. So that's one part of it. Another part is people who get divorced, the probate court handles divorces. They handle adoptions, things
really?
like that. Yeah, so it's probate and family court, it's called. So that's the Register of Probate oversees that, although there are judges who don't answer to the Register of Probate, but all the employees work for the Register of Probate.
That covers a lot.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, that's one thing about these offices is that they're important. Like the Register of Deeds, we have custody of the land records, and if you don't want the records to your house to get messed up.
Yes.
If you are adopting a child, you want that to go smoothly, and so that's the Register of Probate. If you got injured in an accident and you're trying to get the wrongdoer to pay you damages, the Clerk of Courts makes sure things run smoothly and that you're able to get before a judge promptly. If somebody gets in trouble and they have to go to jail, you don't want a sheriff that necessarily is just going to lock them up and throw away the key. The sheriff in Middlesex County, Peter Katusian, really has done a lot with rehabilitation, vocational training, drug treatment, just because he doesn't want to see the same people over and over again. He wants to, when they get released, that they be able to get on with their lives. So these are all offices that are chosen by all of the voters, and unfortunately most people don't even know they exist.
Oh my God.
Which is why it's so good that you're having this program today, so we can talk about it a little bit.
Definitely.
Yeah, so those are the offices, and like sheriff is a 6-year term, Register of Probate is 6 years, the district attorney is 4 years, and they always fall on state elections. So the state election is every 2 years. It's in the even numbered years, 2024. But this year we have a presidential election. In 2026 it would be, you'd be electing a governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, state auditor, and the state treasurer. Those 6 are called the constitutional officers because their positions are set by the state constitution. And they're on the ballot every 4 years. But it was like 2018, 2022, 2026, 2030. That's the cycle that they're on.
So they're not this time, but they'll be next time.
Right, and some of them where it's like a 6-year, you know, some of them are 2-year terms, some are 4 years, and some are 6. So like when I was running, some years it would be a presidential election year, and some years it would be a gubernatorial election year, and it's not necessarily the same offices on the ballot at the same time.
That can get confusing.
Yeah, that's why it's important, you know, you have to follow it a little bit.
Keep up with things.
And this year, what gets even more challenging is there are 5 questions on the ballot.
Yes.
So do you want to talk about them?
Yes, I would love that.
Okay.
Please go.
Well, I'll go through the 5 pretty quickly. I had mentioned in the constitutional officers, the Office of State Auditor. And the job of the state auditor is to audit the different offices of state government. For instance, at the register, an audit means you go in and make sure the financial procedures are all being done correctly. Every 5 years or so, somebody from the state auditor's office comes to the Registry of Deeds, and we have to show all the deposit slips, the bank account summaries, all of our records. And no matter how good you have it, they always find something that you can do better, which is good. But the one office in state government that the state auditor is banned from auditing is the legislature. And there's a reason for that, and it's the separation of power. The auditor is part of the executive, like the governor, the auditor, the secretary of state. But then you have the legislature, and these branches of government kind of jealously guard their independence. But the state auditor wants to audit the legislature. And she's gathered enough signatures to put a question on the ballot this year, asking the voters whether or not she should be allowed to do that. And so a yes vote would say, yes, she should be able to, and a no would be no change to the law as it is now. And even if it passes, there's a chance that the court, the Supreme Judicial Court, will say, no, this is unconstitutional, but we don't know. So that's number one. Number two is probably something that's near and dear to your heart, and that would be eliminating MCAS as a requirement of graduation. And I only say that because you're a lot closer to high school than I am. MCAS didn't exist when I was in high school. So right now, you have to pass the MCAS to graduate. And this law would eliminate that requirement. I don't know if it would eliminate MCAS entirely, but it wouldn't make it a graduation requirement. So that's number two. Number three is to allow transportation drivers, which I think primarily means Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, to form a union, to collectively bargain. Because I think that they're framed as independent contractors right now. And so I don't think they fall under the law that allows collective bargaining. This law, this question, if it passed, would allow that to happen. Number four is it would legalize the use of some psychedelic drugs like mushrooms and things like that. One of the arguments in favor of it is people who are suffering from like post-traumatic stress disorder and other things either have or think that those substances might provide some assistance to them. The other side is that might be the case, but doing it by a ballot referendum isn't the right way to do it. And by legalizing it, you run the risk of accidental exposure to kids and pets and things like that. And then the fifth and final one is to increase the minimum wage for tipped workers, like people who work in wait staff in restaurants. I think they get the minimum wage for them now is $6.50 an hour, and the expectation is their tips would make up for it. This would increase their minimum wage to the state minimum wage, which I think is $15, and it would do it gradually over 5 years. And they could still get tips, but then the tips would be allocated among all of the employees at the restaurant, including like the back of the house people who don't want to get tips. So those are the five: state auditor, audit the legislature, eliminate MCAS as a requirement, Uber and Lyft drivers unionize, legalize some psychedelic drugs, and the final one is the increase the minimum wage for wait staff.
Is there a place where people can go and find out more information about these ballot questions? Sure.
The Massachusetts Secretary of State has a great site. I don't know the URL, but if you Google Massachusetts Secretary of State elections, it's easy to find. And it not only has the questions, but it has the argument in favor of a yes vote and the argument in favor of a no vote. So they go out and find an advocate for each side who then composes an argument in favor of it, and they post it on the website, the Secretary of State's website. So you can go there in one space, you can kind of read the argument in favor of each of the five questions.
That's really helpful.
It is, yeah.
Is there anything else that would be helpful for the voters to know in this upcoming election?
Sure. Well, I think the importance of voting, we've talked about that.
Definitely.
And I think that all of the opportunities to vote, like you don't just have to go to the polls from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on election day. I think every community has what they call early voting, which means they designate some place where you can go in person ahead of time to vote. And then Massachusetts, since the onset of COVID, has what they call no excuse mail-in ballots. Used to be, it was really hard to vote what they called absentee. Like if you were going to Europe and you weren't going to be around for the election, they would let you vote ahead of time. But it was very strict. But with COVID, all you have to do is ask. So for instance, I've already voted.
Really?
In this election.
Nice.
Because I put in my request, they sent me my ballot, and I filled it out, and I put it in the mail. And the Secretary of State's office also has a really good website feature that's called Track Your Ballot. And when you find that, it asks you for your name and maybe your address, and it tells you the status of your ballot. Like if I went on mine, it would probably say it was mailed out to me on whatever, October 9th, because they don't know that I've put it back in the mail. So I'm going to check that in a couple of days, and it should say received, awaiting processing. And that way you know that it got there okay. So yeah, I mean, that's changed how I think candidates work, because it's still 3 weeks till the election.
Yeah.
And if you think about all the commercials that are running on TV and campaign literature that's being mailed to my house, it doesn't make any difference to me because I've already voted. Yeah. But it's, I mean, I like doing it that way because you're not waiting until the last minute. You know, who knows if you're going to get a flat tire on election day and not be able to make it to the polls. But however you do it, it's just important to vote.
Do it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
This has been the Lowellian. I'm Lauren. This is Richard Howe. Thank you for joining us.